My sister was the favorite for 20 years while I paid for everything alone. Now my parents demand I pay her $40,000 debt. But when they showed up at my work to humiliate me, I sent them a legal letter that made them disappear forever. I'm 30 years old. I work in finance and make good money, and I still can't believe I had to get to the point of sending a cease and desist letter to my own parents. But well, here we are. The thing is, what happened 6 months ago basically forced me to cut contact with my entire family. And although at first I felt guilty, now I understand it was the best decision of my life. I guess I should start at the beginning, when I was a kid, because this problem didn't start out of nowhere. I mean, it had literally been brewing for decades. I grew up in a pretty normal family, or so I thought as a kid. My parents, mom and dad, both worked. We had a decent house. We weren't rich, but we didn't lack anything either. I was the oldest, and when I was like 8 years old, my sister Grace was born, and that's when everything changed, although at the time I didn't understand it because I was a child, you know? But looking back, literally from the day Grace came home from the hospital, I became invisible. It's not an exaggeration. It's just that my parents, especially my mom, acted like Grace was the only person in the world. She'd cry and everyone would run. She needed something, and I had to wait because Grace was more important. At first, I thought it was normal because she was a baby. But the thing is, it never stopped. When Grace was like 5 years old and I was 13, it was already obvious to everyone. I got good grades, behaved well, helped around the house, and my parents barely congratulated me. Grace got a C in kindergarten, and there was a party, gifts, celebration. I won a math award at school, and my mom said, "Oh, that's nice, honey," and kept watching TV. Grace drew a scribble, and my parents framed it and hung it in the living room. Can you believe it? They literally had like 20 of Grace's drawings all over the house, and not a single photo of my graduation or my certificates or anything. When I complained, my mom said I was the oldest and had to be more mature. That Grace needed more attention because she was little. But Grace never stopped being little in their eyes. You know what I mean? Things got worse in adolescence. I worked from age 15, saved for college because my parents made it clear they weren't going to help me much. Well, they didn't make it clear with words. They just never offered, and when I asked, they told me to look for scholarships or student loans. So I worked like crazy. At a supermarket after school, on weekends, in summer, wherever. I saved every penny. Grace, meanwhile, did nothing, literally nothing, and my parents spoiled her in everything. She wanted a new phone every 6 months, and they gave it to her. She wanted designer clothes, and they bought them for her. She wanted to go out with her friends, and they gave her money without asking what for. They gave me like $20 a month allowance until I was 16, and told me that should be enough. I left for college at 18, and honestly, it was a relief to get out of that house. I studied finance, worked the whole time to pay my expenses because my parents' help was basically non-existent, like $200 a month if that. And that's when they remembered. Grace, meanwhile, started high school and was already the official spoiled child. My parents bought her a car when she turned 16, you know? A 2018 Honda Civic, new, nice. They never offered to help me buy a car. I had to save and buy myself a used one that broke down every 2 weeks. When I mentioned to them that it wasn't fair, my mom told me I was a man and could manage on my own, that Grace needed safe transportation because she was a woman. I mean, seriously? I graduated at 22, got a good job at an investment firm, and started earning well from the beginning. My parents barely came to my graduation. They arrived late and left early because Grace had some event at school, I don't know what. But well, I was already used to it. I cut contact almost completely for a few years, only saw them at Christmas and family birthdays. And honestly, I was fine that way. I built my life, bought my apartment at 26, had my friends, my career was going excellent, and I didn't need the family drama. But then Grace went to college, and that's when the real disaster started. Turns out my parents paid for everything. Full tuition, rent for a super nice apartment near campus, new car because the other one was already old, credit cards with no limit, absolutely everything. And Grace, being Grace. She partied all the time, failed like 3 semesters in a row, changed majors every year because she couldn't find her passion, bought clothes and shoes and who knows what else all the time. My parents kept sending her money every month, like $2,000 or $3,000, and she burned it on nothing. I knew because my aunt, my mom's sister, told me everything. She was the only person in the family who recognized that the favoritism was absurd and that Grace was spoiled rotten. Grace finally graduated at 26, 8 years after starting, with a degree in some liberal arts thing that was useless. My parents threw a huge party, invited the whole family, spent thousands of dollars. When I graduated with honors in exactly 4 years, we had a family dinner at a mediocre restaurant and nobody took photos. But anyway, Grace graduated, and I thought maybe now she'd have to work and mature, right? Well, no. She moved back to my parents' house and stayed there for like 2 years, doing absolutely nothing. My parents kept giving her money, paid for everything, and she just went out with friends and bought things online. About a year ago, Grace finally moved to her own apartment. My parents paid the deposit and first month's rent, obviously. And during that year, I barely heard anything from them. Which was perfect. I talked to my aunt from time to time, and she told me Grace was going through hard times, but never gave details. I honestly didn't ask much because I didn't want to get involved. And then 6 months ago, I got the call that changed everything. It was a Sunday morning. I was at my apartment, relaxing, watching a series, and the phone rings. It was my mom, which was already weird because she never called me. I answered, and before I said anything more than, "Hello," she started screaming. And when I say screaming, I mean really screaming, hysterical. That Grace was in trouble, that she owed money to dangerous people, that they urgently needed my help. I asked her what exactly was happening, and that's when she told me the amount, $40,000. I stayed quiet processing that because, how the hell does someone accumulate $40,000 in debt at 28 years old without having a job or anything? I asked her what it was for, and my mom started with evasions. That they were personal loans, that Grace had had unexpected expenses, that it had been credit cards. I told her that didn't explain that amount, and she got more aggressive, that it wasn't time for questions, that Grace was in danger, that the creditors were bad people who were threatening her, that we had to help her now. Then came the part that left me frozen. My mom said, "You earn well, Benjamin. You can pay that. She's your sister. It's your obligation to help her." Just like that. She didn't ask me for help. She told me I had to pay. I said no, that wasn't my debt, that Grace was an adult and had to solve her own problems. My mom started crying and saying I was a horrible brother. How could I be so selfish that if anything happened to Grace, it was going to be my fault? I tried to stay calm and told her no, that I definitely wasn't going to pay that Grace needed to learn responsibility and that they had spoiled her to this point. My mom got furious, like I'd never heard her like that. She told me I'd always been ungrateful, that they had given me everything when I was a child, and now that they needed something from me, I refused. I reminded her that I had paid for practically everything myself since I was 18, that they had never supported me like Grace, that the difference was abysmal. She said that was a lie, that I was remembering things wrong, that I'd always liked to play the victim. That's when I got angry too, and told her I wasn't going to continue with that conversation, that my answer was no, and it was final. I hung up and sat there shaking with rage. I couldn't believe that after years of ignoring me and giving everything to Grace, they now came to ask me for money like nothing, as if I owed them something. The truth is, I felt between furious and hurt, because part of me still wanted my parents to see me, value me, but this confirmed that for them, I was only useful when they needed money. The next few days were a nightmare. My mom called me like 20 times. I sent everything to voicemail. Text messages started coming from my dad, which was weird because he almost never talked or got involved in anything, but there he was backing up my mom. The messages said things like, "Your mother is very upset. Grace is in real danger. We need you to be reasonable." I blocked their numbers. Then the cousins started. The uncles, even family friends I hadn't seen in years, all with the same message, that I was rich and selfish, that family helps each other, that Grace needed me. It was obvious my parents had told them their version of the story, where I was the villain. Someone had tried to access my accounts using my personal information. The attempt was blocked because the bank has good security, thank God, but it still scared me. I called the bank and they told me someone had tried to make a large transfer presenting themselves as me, with my social security number and everything. I filed the corresponding report and started investigating. It didn't take me long to connect the dots. I sent Grace a message, the only one who had all my personal information, because years ago, when we were younger, she needed my social security number for some school procedure, I don't know what, and I gave it to her without thinking much. I told her I knew she had tried to rob me and she better explain herself. To my surprise, she answered almost immediately. She called me and started crying, saying she was so sorry, that she was desperate, that the creditors were really threatening her, that she urgently needed the money. I asked her how she had come to owe so much, and that's when she told me the truth. Turns out for years, Grace had been living completely beyond her means. She bought designer clothes, went to expensive restaurants, traveled, all with credit cards. When the cards reached their limit, she took out personal loans to pay the cards. When she couldn't pay the loans, she went to less legal lenders, those who charge absurd interest, and that's how she had fallen into a $40,000 hole. I asked her why she didn't work to pay at least part of it, and she said she'd had some jobs, but none of them she liked, so she quit. The last time she had worked was like 8 months ago, at a store, and she lasted 3 weeks. I told her that was her problem, not mine, and that I couldn't believe she had tried to rob me. She started saying that Mom and Dad had told her to do it, that they thought I wasn't going to notice, or that I wouldn't care because I had a lot of money. I froze. My own parents had encouraged Grace to try to rob me? I asked her if she was sure, and she said yes, that Mom specifically told her to find a way to access my accounts, that I had enough money, and that I was selfish for not sharing it with family. I hung up and sat down to process that. My parents hadn't only asked me for the money and gotten angry when I said no, but they had literally tried to have me robbed. My own family. I felt sick, literally had nausea. That night I couldn't sleep, just tossed and turned in bed thinking about everything. About all the years of favoritism, of being ignored, of being the son who didn't matter except when they needed something. 2 days later, I was at my apartment on a Saturday afternoon when there was a knock on the door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I went to see and almost had a heart attack when I saw through the peephole that it was my parents. I hadn't spoken to them since I blocked their numbers. I thought about not opening, but I knew if I didn't, they were going to make a scene there in the hallway. So I opened. They came in without me inviting them, and my mom immediately started with the drama. How dare I block them? That it was disrespectful, that Grace was desperate, that same week the creditors had threatened her in person. I told her that wasn't my problem, and my mom started screaming. My dad, who normally just observes and says little, also got involved saying, I was a disaster as a son, that they had raised me better than that family always helps each other. I reminded them they had never helped me, that everything I had earned on my own, while Grace was given everything. My mom said that was different, that Grace needed more support because she was more sensitive, more delicate. I told her Grace was a spoiled adult who had never had to face consequences for anything, and that this was their fault for raising her that way. My dad took a step toward me, and for a second I thought he was going to hit me, but he just pointed his finger at me and said that if I didn't help Grace, they were going to remove me from their will, that I wasn't going to inherit anything. I laughed, literally laughed in his face, and told them I didn't give a damn about their will, that I had never expected anything from them, and that I definitely wasn't going to change my mind because of such a pathetic threat. My mom started crying for real this time. That manipulation technique she'd used since I was a kid, but it didn't work on me anymore. I told them to leave my apartment and not come back. My dad said I was going to regret it, that someday I was going to need them, and they weren't going to be there. I told him perfect, that I'd gone years without needing them and I was fine. I gently pushed them toward the door and closed it. They stayed outside yelling for a while, banging on the door, but eventually they left. I thought that would be the end of it, but no, of course not. About 2 weeks later, I received a certified letter from a lawyer It was from my parents. I mean, they had hired a lawyer to send me a letter threatening to sue me for moral and family obligation of assistance. I read that letter like 3 times, unable to believe what it said. Basically, they argued, I had a legal obligation to help my sister in times of need, that my refusal constituted family abandonment, and that if I didn't pay voluntarily, they were going to explore legal options. I called my aunt, the only sane person in the family, and told her everything. She couldn't believe it either. She told me the rest of the family was on my parents' side, that everyone thought I was being selfish, but that she knew the truth about how they'd always treated me. She advised me to cut contact completely with all of them, that those people were toxic and would never change. That night, I made the decision. I blocked everyone, absolutely all family members except my aunt. I blocked phone numbers, social media, email, everything. I changed my phone number and only gave the new one to my aunt and my close friends. I thought I'd finally have peace, but I didn't count on how persistent they could be. They started sending me physical letters to my apartment, messages from unknown numbers that were obviously them using other people's phones, emails from new accounts. It was horrible. I felt like I was being harassed. The harassment continued for weeks, messages increasingly aggressive, more manipulative. My mom sent me an email from a new account saying that if Grace died because of the creditors, it was going to be my fault and that she was going to hate me for the rest of her life. My dad sent me one saying I was a disgrace, that he wished I'd never been born. Cousins I barely knew wrote me entire paragraphs about how family was the most important thing and that I was destroying everything. I held on as best I could, but the straw that broke the camel's back was when my mom showed up at my work. Yes, she literally went to my office. She got past reception saying she was my mother and had a family emergency, and they let her up. She came onto my floor yelling my name, making a scene in front of all my colleagues, my boss, everyone. She was saying I was a bad son, that my sister was going to die because of me. How could I work calmly knowing my family needed me? It was humiliating, the worst experience of my professional life. Security eventually removed her, but the damage was done. I had to sit down with my boss and explain the family situation, which was horrible because I've always kept my personal and professional life separate. My boss was understanding, thank God, but it was still embarrassing. That same afternoon, I hired a lawyer. I told him the whole story, showed him all the messages, the emails, told him about Grace's attempted theft, everything. My lawyer told me I had enough to send a cease and desist letter to the entire family, and that if they continued, we could request a restraining order. We did exactly that. My lawyer sent certified letters to my parents, to Grace, and to several family members who had participated in the harassment, warning them that any additional contact would result in legal action. We also included a copy of the bank report about Grace's fraud attempt, which I think scared them because it implied she could get into serious legal trouble if I decided to press charges. And just like that, suddenly, everything stopped. Total silence. No messages, no letters, no calls from weird numbers, nothing. It was strange at first, after weeks of constant harassment. But little by little, I started to feel better. Lighter, you know? Like I'd taken a huge weight off my shoulders. My aunt kept me updated on what was happening with them, although I asked her not to tell me much because I needed to disconnect completely. She told me my parents were furious, that they were telling everyone their version of the story, where I was the horrible son who abandoned the family in their time of need. Grace apparently is still in trouble with the debts. I think my parents ended up paying something, but not everything, and she had to file for bankruptcy or something like that. My aunt says Grace had to move back in with my parents, and that she's working at a call center, which is ironic because it's exactly the type of job she used to say was beneath her. My parents still blame me for everything, obviously. It's been 6 months since the cease and desist, and my life has improved. Incredibly. I got a promotion at work 2 months ago, like a big promotion with a salary increase and everything. I started dating someone, a girl I met at a networking event, and it's the first serious relationship I've had in years, because before I was always so stressed with family drama that I had no energy for anything else. Now I'm calm. I sleep well. I don't have that constant anxiety of wondering when the next attack is going to be. My aunt visited me last week and told me she was proud of me, that I had done the right thing even though it had been difficult. She told me some younger cousins are starting to realize my parents were always unfair to me because now they see how they treat Grace compared to others, and some have sent me apology messages, although I haven't responded because I'm still not ready for that. And maybe I'll never be ready, honestly. Do I feel guilty sometimes? Yes. I'm not going to lie. There are days where I wonder if I should have helped at least a little, if I was too harsh. But then I remember everything. All the years of being ignored, of working to pay for my things while Grace received everything for free, of them trying to rob me, of the humiliation at my office, and I know I made the right decision. I didn't owe them anything. I never owed them anything. Blood doesn't make you family, actions do, and they never acted like family to me. I was an ATM, a backup option for when they needed me, but never a son, never a brother who mattered. Now I'm building my own family, with friends who do value me, with a partner who really sees me, with people who are there not just when they need something but always. And that's enough. More than enough, actually.